I was asked how I knew there was a God and if I had ever seen or spoken to him. My response was no, I have not. However, I have never once had a prayer go unanswered. I may not have liked the answer, but not one prayer made in earnest has gone unanswered my entire life. Sometimes there is a knowing, a conviction that is unshakable, that always comes to fruition. In my darkest moments, there has always been an energy comforting me and giving me the strength to persevere, conquering my fears, allowing my light to shine. Life gave me many difficult lessons, which allow me to understand many frequencies, having lived with them or been in close enough proximity to understand them. Sometimes circumstances propel us towards our highest divinity, even though we resist. I have made my living for the last 15 years assisting people with my voice and energy to heal. When I first began to make my living using my voice, sound healing was still very obscure. Although I had been doing it my entire life, it was the first time I consciously chose to do it for my living. I was teaching at the Sound Institute in San Francisco. My family and I were living on very little income at the time. I became friends with one of the students at the school. At the time, her uncle had lung cancer that had metastasized to his brain. She asked me if I could help him. I told her I would do what I could. I worked with Jim over the phone twice a day to begin with. He was home in hospice care with his wife Penny and in a lot of pain and discomfort. Because of the state of Jim's energy field, Penny and Jim's daughter-in-law allowed me to push energy through them into Jim. Jim's pain diminished. A few weeks later, he developed pneumonia, and Penny called to cancel hospice and rushed him to the hospital. 4 days later, Penny called me crying. Jim had not had food or water for 4 days and was placed on a ventilator. The doctors told her Jim's brain was dying. There were no brain waves and there would be no coming back from that. She asked me to come to Missouri to help Jim. I told her I could only afford to come for a few days as I had to get back to support my family. I arrived at the hospital and went straight to the ICU. I began working with Jim for the next 8 hours, working in 20-minute spurts with 15 minutes to 20 minutes to rejuvenate. Jim opened his eyes the next day, and the day after that he was off the machines. Jim was improving, and I was scheduled to leave that evening. I knew if I left at that point, Jim would not make it, as he was not yet holding his energy well. I went out and prayed. I asked God to please help. If I left now, Jim would not make it, as he was not yet strong enough. I needed $300 to take care of my family until I could return home in 3 or 4 more days. I went back into the hospital, and as I was entering Jim's room, a woman walked up and handed me $300 and said, "Here, go take care of your family." No one knew who she was. Jim was able to leave the hospital 4 days later on his way to rehab to strengthen his muscles. Through prayers, faith, and energy, Jim had the time to heal and enjoy quality time with his family. The following is Jim's family story of our journey together. This is only one example of why I know there is a God. Reverend Emmanuel, aka Manny to our family, is a true blessing that I believe through our prayers God sent him to help Jim. I am Jim's daughter-in-law, and I am in the video you see posted below. Jim, or Dad to me, as I have always called him, has been terminally ill with stage 4 cancer of the lungs and the brain for almost a year now. Since he was diagnosed, and as time progressed, the doctors could no longer do anything further to help him. He underwent radiation to the brain and chemo, and it was no help. He was then sent home for hospice care, and my mother-in-law and all of us were told to prepare and start making arrangements as Jim may not have more than a few weeks to live. During this time at home, my husband and I, Penny his wife, and a few family members who cared for Jim 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with occasionally a nurse coming in to check his vitals, etc. Jim progressed to get worse as days went by. He started to refuse to eat. He was terribly constipated and was in pain 99% of the time, moaning and complaining of his chest hurting and his lower abdomen. The hospice nurse diagnosed it as a urinary infection and/or kidney infection from the catheter. We had the catheter removed and had antibiotics prescribed for him. A nurse also came in to help release some of his bowels, but she was unsuccessful. He was then prescribed stool softeners, which did not help. As days went by, Jim became weaker and weaker, and then we got a call from a family member telling us about Reverend Emmanuel. The family member explained what Manny did. She was very hesitant about what we would think or feel about her or Manny. At this point, we had no other options and were so grateful that she had called us and that someone was willing to help my father-in-law. Because the doctors gave up on him, and we were not giving up, nor was Jim giving up. He wanted to live, he told us. He wanted to try anything at this point. Manny has a God-given gift that we are so grateful for. My mother-in-law had immediately, the next morning, called Manny at around 8:30 a.m., not thinking about the time difference being in California. So it was 6:30 a.m. Manny's time. A man answered, and just hearing his voice was so calming and reassuring that he would try to help my father-in-law. He did not promise anything, only that he would do his best in helping Jim get strong enough so that we could continue in helping him get well the rest of the way. He explained to us his gift and had dedicated himself to calling 2 times a day to help in his healing technique and prayer for Jim. Sometimes it was for over an hour. We would help in the process of healing, with sounds and vibrations to my father-in-law. It was a very unique experience, and honestly, such a beautiful, amazing talent Manny has. My mother-in-law and I would find ourselves enjoying the sounds and could feel an energy that would move through our bodies and hands that sometimes became warm, and even a nauseated feeling that we were going to get sick. It was the buildup of energy within our bodies we would help push through Jim. It is so difficult to explain every little detail of our experience, but I can just tell you that I knew something was working in Jim's favor, and therefore I became dedicated as well to help Manny get Jim better. Whatever it took, as we began our journey with Manny, we could see a difference in Jim each day. He became more alert and stronger in many ways. Jim would very often throughout the day reach out and ask for Manny. As he would say, "Mendon." He would call out for him in a whispering voice. We would allow Dad to listen to the day before sessions by headphones again, and until Manny would call again. Jim became better as days went by to the point he no longer needed any type of pain medication. He refused to have any when we would ask him if he wanted any. He would say no, he was not hurting, other than his butt, which he would complain about. Jim was still very weak and had started to have a cough that sounded as if he was so weak he could not give it up out of his lungs, almost like he was choking and was screaming for help. This made my mother-in-law call hospice and cancel the contract so she could take him to the hospital. The ambulance arrived, and off to Barnes Hospital of St. Peter's we went. He was admitted into the ICU for tests, which came back that both lungs were full of fluid, as he had pneumonia and blood clots in his lungs. They also found out that his bowels were so compacted to the size of a softball inside him, and there was some sort of internal bleeding going on inside of him, that the doctors were unsure of where it originated. His blood platelet count was at 17,000, and a safe zone is at least 50,000 for a normal person. It ranges even over 100,000. This was very terrifying to all of us. We were told by a specialist that Dad no longer had any brain waves, and we needed to make a decision to let him pass away. He was so ill that there was nothing further the doctors could do for him. My mother-in-law and husband refused to give up on Dad, as Jim still knew of his surroundings, and we knew the doctors were wrong. He was just another statistic to them based on what they saw in the past and end results. Jim was so very weak and was not being fed or given any fluids intravenously for 4 days straight. My mother-in-law and husband fought the doctors to feed him or give him fluids. He was dying. They were killing him. Dad was begging for food and water. He was so dehydrated and hurting from starvation. Unfortunately, a human error was made within their system. He was still a hospice patient, and no resuscitation orders were in place. He was not to be given anything to basically survive, just to be made comfortable to pass away. My mother-in-law and husband were not going to sit back and let them kill Jim. They went to the administrator of the hospital demanding answers. Jim was then placed on a ventilator, and antibiotics were started to give him fluids and protein intravenously to build his strength back from starvation on the 5th day. Jim was so weak and hardly even responded to anyone anymore, or even opened his eyes anymore. He was pretty much lifeless with the machines breathing for him. My mother-in-law was told to call the family in that Jim was not going to be with us much longer, and said it could be even less than 24 hours left. My mother-in-law called Manny in a plea for help. She knew Jim needed Manny to help, that the doctors had given up, and had set a time on Jim's life left. Manny, without any hesitation, knew he needed to come to St. Louis to help Jim. And knowing his situation and leaving his family behind, he flew into St. Louis to answer our plea for help. Manny began that very day with Jim at the hospital in his healing gift, all day and late into the evening. On the 2nd day, we had already seen life coming back into Dad. It was truly amazing to wake up to Dad looking at me and moving his hands to reach for me. I woke up for some odd reason and looked up at Jim and screamed out, "Dad, good morning, your eyes are open." Penny, my mother-in-law, I scared the daylights out of her as she jumped out of a deep sleep and said, "What? Oh my goodness, Jim, you're awake." This was around 4:30 a.m. The nurse Ryan was in there to witness this as well. As daylight came around, Manny again was picked up and brought to the hospital, where he began another day around the clock working on the healing of Dad. Curiosity began to flow around the hospital, as no matter where you were, you could hear Manny and his singing tones and prayer. Some of us were so curious that they would start to ask for Manny's help for their loved ones. They had seen what he was doing for Jim, and of course, in hope, were coming to Manny, almost begging him. Manny was very nervous. You could tell about 1. Being in a hospital, 2. Doing this in public and getting so much attention that he was. You could tell he wanted to be private in what he did, but really had no choice at this point, being in a hospital. We had many accepting Manny because it was our religious belief. We had some doctors and nurses who thought it was funny, and at first we heard others talking about Manny who were a little scared of it, and what he was doing was strange to them. And some just thought it was stupid and make jokes about, "Let's get the snake charmers here now." We had some complaints from neighboring patients' families. This did not stop Manny or our family from healing Jim. We were determined this was going to work, and no matter what anyone said or what we heard, it would not shake our faith or make us stop. But guess what? The ones who were not laughing were doctors who could not believe the results from the data and said it was impossible. They also started to admit to us how this was truly a miracle and it had to be Manny and our prayers getting Jim better. The test results kept coming back better and better. Some became normal again, and as many of these specialist doctors said, it was not possible. The neurologist did an EEG brainwave test to check his brainwaves after seeing Jim improve and responding to commands like opening his eyes, nodding his head, squeezing a hand, and thumbs up action. The doctor at this point had even said to us this was not possible. Once a person loses all brainwaves, there is no coming back. He was floored by the results and said Jim had brainwaves again and was just a little weak now. His attitude changed tremendously as a doctor, and his bedside manners to others, and his belief and faith in spiritual healing as well. Many doctors participated in the healing with Manny and our family as they wanted to experience it for themselves. The neighboring patients' family members came to realize that whatever Manny was doing was not so weird after all, and they were then asking for Manny to help their loved one. We watched so many of the employees from all parts of the hospital come around to see what they had been hearing and to join us in helping pray for Dad. I can say this experience has changed many lives and medical physicians' view of the way they think and approach things now. We were even told by many we will never be forgotten and that they were now blessed to have Manny as part of their lives. We had so many say they have witnessed a miracle, and there is no other way to say it. So anyways, as days went by, Manny was able to get Dad strong enough to breathe on his own again, and no more ventilator. He was able to stop the unknown bleeding within Jim's body that the doctors could not explain. Jim's bowels began to come out and release, and his lungs cleared up, and Jim's platelets went up to 51,000. Which was the goal. We prayed for at least 50,000 so they could do the surgery to remove the tubes and put a tracheotomy in, just in case his throat would start to swell. We had this to keep him alive. That night, doctors tested Dad's platelets and they were only at 12,000. They were concerned that they were not going to be able to do the surgery, or if the platelets were not over 50,000, a person could bleed to death. His blood would not clot properly, and it would be too thin for him to recover from surgery. So after all day Manny working over Dad, and with our prayers the next morning, Penny and I were awake waiting for the test results and the doctor to come in and tell us if they were going to do the surgery or not. I can remember my mother-in-law looking back at me when the doctor entered the room and crossing her fingers as she reached back for me. I think it was the quietest moment ever since I had been there. It was like we held our breath for several minutes. The doctor smiled and said Jim's platelets were at 51,000. "Thank you, Jesus," we both yelled out. I remember very well even now as I'm typing it. I became very emotional as we both in that exact moment burst into tears and thanked God for answering our prayers. Jim could have the surgery. Manny did it. He was able to get Jim's platelets up to a stable and comfortable level, and even a little more than that. Unbelievable, the doctor said. He was then on board with us and the healing process. There was no possible way that this happened overnight or even within a few hours without being given platelets, the doctors explained. So he said that Manny and God answered our prayers yet again. So Jim made it through surgery with flying colors. And as each day went by, Jim became more and more alert, and test results started to normalize, and he was getting stronger. After 1 week of Manny working with him, he went from lifeless with no hope to now doing amazingly well. He has been sent to a rehab center to help him with his ability to walk, talk, eat, and everything else again. Yes, truly a blessing from God. Manny is to us. There is so much each day of this journey that I left untold here, but I will forever remember and embrace it within my heart forever. We now call Manny frequently and will be visiting with him again very soon for the holidays. He, his wife, and child are now part of our family, and we will forever cherish him for what he did for Jim. There is no other answer to why Jim will be going home soon and is doing well again except that the gift Manny has worked. Manny helped give us back Jim. I will never forget the experience of this journey, and it has really opened my mind to how precious life is and that God is and will always be first in my life. Then those I love, such as my family, including Manny, and then others, and then myself. This has forever changed all our family's lives, for we will get to spend another Christmas with Jim and his grandson Jonathan, aged 4, who will get to ride choo-choo trains with Papa soon. Our miracle and journey with Manny has been truly amazing. Thank you, Manny. There are no words that I can say to show you our gratitude and love we have for what you have done. May God bless you and the gift you generously give in helping others. We love you. After reading this, how could you not know there is a God? For me, this is only one of many stories, but one held deep in my heart as it reminded me of the strength that comes with faith.